Colin Liddell. What's going on, Colin?
Yeah, pretty good, Luke. How are you?
Good, good. So what are your 12 rules for life?
I don't think you should have rules, because rules impose a kind of rigidity and they limit your freedom of action. I think you should just have an ever-evolving common sense.
And did you grow up with an ever-evolving sense of common sense, or is that something that you've developed, or both?
I think I probably did, or I might have acquired it along the way, but I think I always had a kind of sensible approach to life, kept things in proportion, don't overreact, like see what's going on, figure out the angles, it's all kind of quite basic stuff, really. I mean, either you're born with it or you have to learn it, or you're fucked, really.
And did you notice that your common sense was decidedly uncommon in dissident political circles?
Yeah, well, yes and no. I mean, dissident political circles, it's easy to poo-poo dissident political circles, but I do think they have a legitimate reason for existing. Things do have to be critiqued from a kind of radical perspective now and then. Without that vital critique from the fringe, a lot of important perspectives will be missed.
Absolutely, but it is kind of breathtaking, the lack of common sense among prominent personalities in dissident circles, which you have chronicled endlessly on your various blogs and short pods.
Yeah, it's kind of become weighed down by all these kind of personal psychodramas and personal issues that people have that they bring into the dissident right, and all these petty beefs and, turf wars that go on. So the thing does need some sort of structure and hygiene.
And you're the fumigator.
No, I don't. I'm not going to volunteer for that role.
Your Andy Nowicki piece just struck me as painfully true. Was it a painful piece to write?
Not really, no. I just thought, let's write about Andy and let's try and be honest and truthful, not to beat around the bush too much. I mean, he has gone off the deep end, really. He is a bit of a conspirator nutcase by now, I have to say, from what he's, said about various things. I was never against Andy being a bit of a conspirator. Our disagreement began when I said, that's fine, Andy, but can you just dig into it and find out the actual data? And that's much more important in a case like that. I mean, if you're pushing a conspiracy theory, you have a duty to try and back it up with the data as much as possible. And Andy seemed to be very kind of unwilling to do that, in my opinion. He seemed to be much more emotionally invested in it, and I could understand why that was. Looking at the way his life had turned out.
Was Andy the individual you knew best out of anyone that you've chronicled in your series Who's Who on the alt-right?
Not really, because there's a lot of things about Andy I just can't resonate with. Just somebody being a Catholic, for example, I just that doesn't make any sense to me. I find it very difficult to believe in Christians. I mean, Christians probably have enough trouble trying to believe in God, and I have enough trouble trying to believe in Christians. I don't think most Christians are genuine. I think that they are kind of LARPing in a strange way.
Well, Christian makes sense if you're married with 4 kids and you want to stay married and you want to be part of, say, a community, particularly a community that you might have grown up in, right? If you intend to stay married, devote yourself to having a family, raising children, then does being a Christian make more sense to you?
Well, you're talking about it more as a kind of form of social behavior, and these are religions, and religions only exist if people believe in them, literally believe in them. They literally think there's a God up there who's literally looking down at them and documenting their every move. And I don't really think people believe that. And so there is the thing you're talking about, which is more of a kind of Jewish perspective, where you have a certain kind of culture and a set of kind of customs and not beliefs, but sort of things that you pay lip service to. And there's a kind of cynicism perhaps in that as well, but it's very functional, and it keeps everybody sort of in the same group, and from that accrue certain benefits. But it's very different from like sincerely believing in a certain religion. And this is the problem with all these kind of so-called faith-based ideologies, is they actually require people to believe in them. And you've heard a lot in recent months about Christian nationalism, and people like Nick Fuentes and Milo going on about it. And these are obviously people who have no real Christian faith, and it would be very difficult for them to have it. And most people would have great difficulty in maintaining a sincere and serious Christian faith in the modern age, especially if they had an IQ above 80.
Now, did you live any substantial portion of your life within a Christian community?
Definitely not, no.
Okay.
I think Christianity had already sort of given up the ghost in my family, like at least one or two generations before me.
Well, I did grow up a Christian, and Christianity as lived is just overwhelmingly a social, cultural experience. What you believe about God plays almost no role in the day-to-day life of your average Christian. It's a social experience. There's a particular place that you gather on Sundays or Saturdays, depending on your denomination, and there's a school that you go to, and there's a certain rhythm to life, and there are certain practices, but what you actually believe about God and theology is a very tiny concern for only a very tiny number of people. So, I mean, I'm just thinking, I was just a kid, but I never spoke to, other kids about what they believed about God or church doctrine. It just never came up. And I was growing up on Seventh-day Adventist college campuses, went to Seventh-day Adventist schools, went to Seventh-day Adventist churches. Everything we did was Seventh-day Adventist. Everyone we knew, everyone I was friends with was Seventh-day Adventist, but we never talked about belief. So I think it is primarily a cultural, social experience for the overwhelming number of people, and they don't really sweat the doctrine and the dogma.
Yeah, there's a kind of disingenuous quality to it. It's almost as if they know it's all fake, the people who run it, and they don't want to really touch that third rail of really, pushing people's literal faith in their so-called faith.
Nick Fuentes and his Christianity, it's unlike any Christianity of which I'm aware. I mean, he never seems to actually go to church. He doesn't seem to have a connection with any clergyman who guides him. It just seems to me to be a more socially acceptable way of going about the politics that he has. Do you have any thoughts on Nick's Christianity?
Yeah, I think it's non-existent. I think it's fake. I think he just uses it to, push certain agendas. It's a good way for him to be a little bit counter-Semitic, shall we say?
Yeah. And same with Milo. I mean, Milo, did a big song and dance about how religious he's become and turning his back on homosexuality. My thought was always, well, if this is real, he will try to make amends for all the people he screwed over. Like, we'll start to hear, Milo came to me and he apologized. He cataloged, the things that he did against me, and he asked me how he could make amends and I didn't get any of that. So with Milo, again, it just seemed like another method for self-assertion. Any thoughts on Milo's Christianity?
Yeah, for a kind of flagrantly homosexual man like Milo, becoming a Christian is a kind of homosexuality, if you think about it. So it's a way to do something very, very taboo from the perspective of being a flagrant homosexual. Yeah,
it's another form of dress-up.
Yeah, it's another form of degeneracy, really, if you think of it, because like for somebody like Milo, who's a flagrant homosexual, he's kind of normalized all the degeneracy of homosexuality. And then from that perspective, that homosexual degeneracy is normalized. So something like Christianity appears like a kind of alien other, and therefore it becomes a kind of a substitute degeneracy, so to speak. So there's a kind of psychological pattern where he's kind of breaking the normality that he's in.
Jason Kessler has left, apparently, the Dissident Right, because nobody bought him a computer, as you so eloquently wrote. Any thoughts on the departure of Jason Kessler from metapolitics?
Probably it's for the best. I think he'll be better off. I don't think he was getting anything out of it. I don't really know the full story behind Jason Kessler. There's a lot of rumors. There's talk about him being a Fed and so on. There's talk about him being a bit of a left winger a couple of years before the Unite the Right thing. So who really knows what the backstory is? Maybe he's just been pulled in and told to knock it off by his superiors, or maybe it is a genuine case of somebody who was sucked into the alt-right and thought he could do some good. I think the problem he had was that it was his main thing. It became his apparently anyway, assuming that everything we see is on the level. He was trying to make a living at it, and for anybody to try and make a living at dissident politics, you have to be either very, very insane or very, very talented. Very, very few people can make a living at it. I never thought that I could make a living at dissident politics. I mean, I had my money already salted away, and I wasn't too worried about the financial side of being in dissident politics. So I think if you're going into it and it's going to be your main thing and your way of keeping the wolf from the door, then you're in big trouble.
Now, you believe that the Chinese and the Russians have used dissident politics on either the far right or the far left to destabilize the United States and to weaken it. I wonder why the Chinese and the Russians didn't want to invest more in Jason Kessler.
I assume that it's not part of their system. Their system is to weaponize all these kinds of people and to get the dissidents done for free in that sense. And they put their resources into things like bot farms and all sorts of kind of influence operations, like things like Zero Hedge and the UNS review and things like that. So it's very, very structured, and they don't want to pay everybody that's in the dissident movement. I mean, they basically the Russians and the Chinese try to kick up all sorts of dissidents, both from the nationalist right and from the left wing, and from various ethnic grievance groups. And that's a lot of people they're trying to sort of radicalize, and they don't want to actually pay each and every one of them, or even a substantial minority of them. They want to get as much of that done for free as possible. So it's a question of utilizing people's naivety and sort of using them up and burning them out.
A few months ago, the Daily Wire offered Steven Crowder a 4-year, $50 million contract. I mean, surely that wasn't primarily a contract that was about business. That there had to be, I would expect, something else going on there. I mean, can you get your head around Daily Wire offering Steven Crowder $50 million for 4 years of making live streams?
I'm not really a follower of Steven Crowder's content, and so a lot of these things are very, very intricate and involved, and it's very, very hard to nail down things. They're also extremely nebulous, and I try to back up everything I say. I try to find clear references to anything I say, so I don't want to be too speculative. I don't want to be too conspiratoric in this sense. I think people should be skeptical about anything that's going on in the dissident world. They should be thinking about what kind of foreign interference there is, and they should be looking at the numbers, like how do these things pay for themselves? If things can't pay for themselves in an obvious way, then it probably means there is somebody behind the scenes manipulating them and financing them for ulterior motives.
Any thoughts on Tucker Carlson getting unexpectedly fired by Fox News?
Was it unexpected? I mean, I think Tucker's been sailing pretty close to the wind for a long time. I mean, a few years ago, they were going on about, he was losing Fox News advertisers, and I thought that would have been a death sentence. But surprisingly, they managed to kind of keep him in there, even though he was losing them advertising money. And I think that I guess he was maybe attracting viewers that might have been bringing some income into Fox News, but obviously he was kind of cruising for a bruising, and the way he was going on, it was going to kind of end badly, I thought. So I wasn't too surprised when they pulled the string on him.
Yeah. And what is Nick Fuentes doing? So he signed on to be something for Kanye West. Is he still streaming? Is he doing anything that's crossing your radar?
And this whole kind of Ali Alexander, Yay 24, Milo shit show has blown up in recent weeks. And I'm not really sure if Nick has an answer for it, because it does make him look bad. And also, Nick has to keep doing something new. And after a while, that becomes harder and harder. You know, it's like with popular music. If you keep having to push the envelope, it becomes harder and harder to make music that sounds good. You know, he's a very talented person, and he's obviously got lots of verbal skills and wit and so on. But after a while, even somebody like Nick Fuentes kind of consumes himself and paints himself into a corner. So I think it all comes down to ideas. It's all about ideas. If people have good ideas and good critique and good analysis, then it's got legs on it. And if they're kind of peddling retarded ideas like Christian nationalism or something, then it's going to go off a cliff at some point.
Well, Christian nationalism, why would that not be an incredibly potent force in America? Like, it's kind of weird for me as a Jew to look at Christian America and I think, why would Christians not want to run America according to their own standards? So it would seem to me that Christian nationalism should be an incredibly potent force in America.
Yeah, you'd think so. But if it was going to happen, why wouldn't it have happened a lot sooner?
Oh, because you have to be pushed to the wall for something like this. Because Christian nationalists, are rarely very Christian. It's just a nicer way of organizing rather than on racial lines.
Yeah, maybe, but I think America's always had a large group of people who have seen themselves as Christian, who have wanted to impose Christian values on the world, who have been concerned about the way that modernity and individualism and consumerism was pushing society. And so there's always been that, in theory at least, there's always been that basis for something like Christian nationalism. But instead of happening like in the last 100 years or so, it's had to wait until the advent of Nick Fuentes. That doesn't really add up in my view. So I think there is something inbuilt in the idea of Christian nationalism that makes it impossible to happen, which kind of cuts it off at the knees before it even can put its shoes on.
Have you thought about where Tucker Carlson might land? Do you think Fox News might be regretting their decision, given the crashing ratings? What do you think is next for Tucker?
Yeah, I'd have to look into that. Like, are the ratings actually crashing? Are they? Is it a downward blip? Is it a long-term thing? People will. It's a bit like this Bud Light thing. People were going on as if Budweiser had finally been brought to their knees, but apparently not, going by their stock valuation. So I'm not really sure how much damage Fox News is suffering from Tucker, and whether it's permanent or not. So we'll have to wait and see on that, and try and find reliable data to estimate what's going on there. But yeah, somebody like Tucker comes along and they have a following, and then they have their moments, and something they eventually they kind of run out of road. And I think in the case of Tucker, that's what happened really. He his shtick was starting to get a bit stale. It was starting to get a bit try hard. He seemed to be kind of whipping himself up into a frenzy more and more in order to try and get some sort of response from his increasingly jaded audience. That's my rough impression. He seemed to be trying too hard. There was a sense that, the whole Tucker thing had kind of come and gone. And so maybe Fox anyway needed to, rethink things and sort of give somebody else a chance. So yeah. It might actually be good timing to, get rid of Tucker. What will happen with Tucker now, it's not really clear. There's been people talking about Tucker running for president and so on. Not really sure if he's that interested in doing that or not. We'll see. If he did run for president, it might be interesting, to see if there was any kind of grassroots response. You would think that presumably going by his popularity on Fox News that there would be some kind of uptake if Tucker tried to run. Come on, Tucker, it's up to you. Let's see the next chapter.
So right now it looks like Donald Trump has a stranglehold hold on the Republican nomination. Ron DeSantis hasn't been doing too well, and it looks right now that Trump is crushing him. Any thoughts on the Republican contest? And then there's that Vivek Ramaswamy guy who seems incredibly eloquent. I noticed he's rising in the polls, and I noticed a lot of enthusiasm about him on Twitter.
Trump just looks so... first of all, he looks old. He looks a bit stale. It's, of course, there's an edgy quality to Trump. There's a way of speaking that creates sparks, but it's something we've all seen before. And most people kind of think, oh, yeah, there's old Trumpy again, blowing off. And we know that there's not really that much substance behind all the rhetoric. And so there's a sense that people are jaded with Trump. He's a bit played out. And so there is definitely a need for somebody new. Ron DeSantis doesn't quite do it. He doesn't have the charisma. He is a bit of a kind of meatball type of character. I mean, he's obviously quite an effective politician at a certain level, but he doesn't seem to have that X factor. And so there is a kind of a yawning chasm for something new to happen. If it is Trump again, it's going to be kind of, I don't know, it's going to be a bit grim, really, to see Trump run again with his usual shtick. He has even more difficult baggage to lug around. He's got this whole January the 6th thing. He's got this stolen election thing. He's got all this kind of lawfare that's being used against him. And instead of being about politics, it just becomes about this personality, this kind of cheap soap opera. And I mean, I really think politics shouldn't be about personalities. It should be much more about ideas and policies. And Trump really cuts across that with his whole me shtick. And personally, I feel a bit bored with the whole Trump train and the debris and the wreckage of that particular train.
And what about on the Democratic side in the run for their presidential nomination? Right now, it looks like Joe Biden has it locked up. On the other hand, Biden's got really low approval ratings. He looks, pretty frail old man.
Yeah, again, it's almost like a mirror image. It's some old guy who's there, who's dominating everything. There's a few other people who could come into the picture, but they don't really seem up to the job either. Also, on the Democrat side, there's a crying need for somebody new to show up, and I don't mean this Robert Kennedy Jr. character, because he's obviously a complete flake, and I don't think he'll amount to much.
Back across the Atlantic Ocean, England seems to have a more than competent prime minister. Any thoughts on Britain's prime minister and how he's perhaps rescuing the Tory party from an overwhelming defeat in the next election?
Yeah, I mean, just looking at it in terms of kind of normie politics, the Tory party is doing not a bad job, and that was the case even with Boris Johnson. Boris Johnson, he was a shambolic character in many ways, but he didn't really make too many missteps. I think obviously he overdid the COVID response and the lockdowns and the furlough and so on, and that kind of caused all sorts of problems. And maybe that would have been fine if these other problems hadn't come along. But apart from that, they seem to be at least trying to do the right thing. And I think Rishi does seem to be particularly competent. He does seem to be just tackling things in a very straightforward way. He's set out his agenda. These are all policies that resonate with the British public, which are obvious and clear to see. And so he has clear targets, and he's gone about trying to hit those targets. So he could actually do well enough to make the next election quite a close run thing, and avoid Keir Starmer becoming prime minister. And Keir Starmer, to me, he seems like a kind of deep state plant almost. They went to great pains to get rid of Jeremy Corbyn, from what I can tell, the establishment, that is. And, they were very worried about Jeremy Corbyn's popularity and the possibility of him becoming prime minister and getting control of the nuclear weapons and supposedly giving them away or abolishing them. So, I think that the British establishment decided to take a hand, and they decided to get a safe pair of hands in the main opposition parties. At the moment, it still looks like Labour should win, but I think somebody extrapolated from the recent local elections that if there was a general election held in Britain, it would be a hung parliament.
And if I was an employee of a large corporation, I'd want someone like Rishi Sunak, running the ship. He seems more than competent.
Yes, but I don't think I'm in favour of some Punjabi guy running Britain. I think there might be a bit of a brown lash, not a backlash, but a brown lash, because there are rather too many people from the subcontinent in prominent positions in the UK, as you know, the Mayor of London, the Home Secretary, the Scottish First Minister. You have all these people who are brown, and you have a rather glaring underrepresentation of white people at the higher positions of government. And so I think there could be a bit of a brown lash where people, without really knowing the reason, just kind of are repelled in some way. And no matter if Rishi does a good job or not, it might be undervalued for that reason.
Coach Red Pill, a right-wing internet personality and dating coach, was arrested in Ukraine. It's just so weird that he would hang out in Ukraine for well over 15 months while Ukraine's at war. And they're producing online content mocking and belittling Ukraine, producing pro-Russia, pro-Putin content from Ukraine, where he is, not a citizen. And I'm just surprised that he's been hanging out there pulling this off. What on earth did he think would happen to him? So yeah, he's been arrested. Any thoughts on the arrest of Coach Red Pill?
Not really, no. I think he was an idiot. He got arrested. If he was doing it from the other side, like if he was living in Russia, producing pro-Ukrainian content, it'd be interesting to see what would happen to him.
Anything about the war in Ukraine that's caught your attention since the last couple of months?
Well, it's sort of grinding on. I think people are waiting for the Ukrainian offensive. They've been preparing. They've trained up a lot of military units. They have quite a lot of new equipment. And the Russian equipment is quite substandard now. They've lost a lot of their best gear. But still, it's very, very hard to call what's going to happen. It's very, very hard to estimate how fragile the Ukrainians have become or the Russians have become. You hear all sorts of crazy things from the Russian side. Some of them sound really weird, like they could crack within a matter of days or weeks. This thing with the Wagner group threatening to pull out of Bakhmut, and all these kind of these rumors of mutinies and rebellions, and so there's a lot of narratives swirling around. It's very, very hard to pick out what's really going on or how solid these narratives are. So I think it really matters what happens on the battlefield, and if the Ukrainians can do some real damage to the Russians with their spring offensive, then that could hopefully get things moving to some sort of conclusion. Because I don't think any of us really want this war to kind of drag on and kind of eat up and consume more and more human lives. So yeah, I hope something happens soon to resolve it in some way. And it's very hard to resolve it without the Russians losing, I feel, because if the Russians win, that really won't be accepted. And they won't be accepted by the Russians. They'll still feel insecure. They'll still feel they have to attempt something else. The West will be very unsatisfied if the Russians succeed. And so that would be an unstable resolution. However, if the Ukrainians were able to succeed and get back their territory, that would lead to a point at which there would be some sort of a stable end to the war, I feel. So I think the Ukrainians really have to do something for this war to stop dragging on.
And do you think China's loving this? The United States is distracted, perhaps makes it easier for China to take Taiwan?
I don't know. I don't think the Americans are really putting that much into it. I think they're still mainly focused on Asia. I think the Chinese probably aren't ready to make a big move against Taiwan. I don't think the Chinese tend to play things that way as well. I think they tend to be more cautious.
Have you been reading any good books lately?
Yeah, every book I read is a good book. The one that springs to mind at the moment is I'm reading Dennis Healy's biography. I'm not sure if people would know who that is now.
Former Chancellor of the Exchequer?
Yes, yeah, he's a very pivotal figure in the Labour Party in the even from the 1950s, but mainly in the 1960s and 1970s and into the 80s. So he was a kind of important figure, mainly on the kind of right side of the party, kind of an opponent to people like Tony Benn and Michael Foot. And, it's quite interesting. It's very informative about post-war Britain and, all the kind of ins and outs of British policy and all the concerns with Britain's declining position and its desire to be part of Europe or not, as the case may be. The thing that struck me was that he actually seems quite smarter than I initially, thought he would be. Because I had a mental image of Dennis Healy as a kind of slightly flippant character, a bit of a caricature almost, and he seems to be quite a poetic and intellectual type, or at least he's trying to be, because he is an ex-grammar school boy.
Well, all the major British politicians seem like at least 20 IQ points smarter than American politicians. Is that fair analysis?
On the face of it sounds plausible.
I mean, they're so much more eloquent. I mean, they're so much more educated. They're so much better read. I mean, and it doesn't necessarily seem to have resulted in any better policies, but they're certainly more erudite.
Well, it's the culture. It's the House of Commons, the way the House of Commons operates, probably, the sort of debating style of politics where people actually debate quite a lot. And you don't really see American politicians debating much. I mean, like the British Prime Minister, he has every week he has to stand up in the House of Commons and do Prime Minister's question time. And, people will ask him quite difficult questions and make insulting remarks and critiques of whatever his government has been up to. And his job is to stand up and defend that and create the right kind of sound bites. And, that does take some sort of skill. And you never see somebody like Joe Biden doing that. It's all this softball questioning from journalists or choosing not to speak to journalists if they so choose. And the US Congress and Senate, people get up and they talk for a few minutes and then they sit down and it's not really a proper debate. It's a bit more like the European Parliament, the American Congress. So it's not so adversarial like the House of Commons. So I think that must be part of it.
Now, there's a character named Charles Johnson, who's done a lot of Twitter spaces with Richard Spencer. Chuck Johnson's been in and out of the news for 6-7 years. I mean, he was the one selecting a lot of the people who went to work in the Trump administration. He went to a State of the Union with Matt Gaetz. Have you paid any mind to Chuck Johnson?
Yeah. I sometimes listen to his Twitter streams or whatever you call them. He says a lot of interesting stuff. It's hard to really nail it down, though. There's rather too many moving parts with Chuck Johnson's narrative. So I wouldn't completely endorse what he's saying. I just sort of keep an open mind on it.
And what's dominating Japanese politics these days?
Yeah, I mean, basically, Japan's just a kind of country that's permanently run by its deep state, and they have a little bit of a political shadow play for the people who might be interested in that, and it's sort of typified by competence, corruption, and something else beginning with the letter C.
Okay, great. Is there anything you want to hit before we wind up for today?
No, no, I just nice to be on the Luke Ford show again,
Okay, great.
and keep on trucking, Luke.